Coming up on the Mindful Midlife Crisis.
In the book that I wrote, The Urgency of Awareness, the chapter 1, we talked about how you and we live in a societal system that has normalized one identity over another. And that a societal system always gears itself to the normalized identity. And what that just means is then that there's benefits you receive from being part of the normalized. And so you are going to have different experiences than someone who's not part of the normalized. And so one of the examples I use is we normalize right-handedness. So those of you listening right now, if you're right-handed, I'm going to say, well, what are the benefits? And a lot of times right-handed people can't think of many. But if you're listening right now and you're left-handed and I say, what are the benefits? Let me guess. You already said it and it came from down under. You're like, scissors. And so all of a sudden, right-handed people start realizing, oh my gosh, I didn't know that stuff was geared. Well, of course, when you're part of the normalized dominant, things just work for you. It's the water that you swim in. It's the air you breathe. You don't see it until someone else talks about, hey, I've had a different experience.
Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis, a podcast for people navigating the complexities and possibilities of life's second half. Join your hosts, Billy and Brian, a couple of average dudes who will serve as your armchair life coaches as we share our life experiences, both the good and the bad, in an effort to help us all better understand how we can enjoy and make the most of the life we have left to live in a more meaningful way. Take a deep breath, embrace the present, and journey with us through the Mindful Midlife Crisis.
Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm your host, Billy, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend, Brian, on the bass. Brian, how you doing over there, man?
I'm elated today, Billy.
Oh, are you in the Christmas spirit? And that's why you're so elated?
I am. I have my Christmas shopping done. The kids are all set. We've got all the presents sitting out by the tree, so they're all happy. That's why I'm elated.
Excellent. That is wonderful to hear. If you're listening to this, you're probably listening to this sometime in January, but we're front-loading all of our episodes right now, so it is the holiday season right now, so happy holidays to everybody out there. I am elated because we have one of my favorite people in the world as a guest today, and she's already just coming in hot. So with all sorts of attitude, I'm very excited to have her here today. It is Jodi Pfarr. Since 2001, Jodi has worked internationally conducting impactful seminars that leave people learning and laughing. Through her captivating presentations and consulting, Jodi seeks to help people discover the human connections that unite us all, unlocking potential within communities, institutions, and individuals alike. She has authored several books, and today she is here to talk about how a better understanding of our societal systems and our experiences within those systems can improve our everyday interactions, both personally and professionally. And I think this is a fitting episode for this season because we have a lot of people coming in who are sharing their experiences that Brian and I are unfamiliar with. So we are very happy to welcome to the show Jodi Pfarr.
Yay! Thank you very much. And this is just me. This ain't me hot. If I was coming in hot, you'd have already bleeped me by now. So
well, we don't bleep anybody. You're unfiltered here. But I am going to say, so I asked Jodi the other day for her 10 roles, and she said, "Are you really going to make me do that corny bullshit?"
Exactly. 10 roles.
So she begrudgingly shared her 10 roles with me, but she is not going to read them off. So I am going to read off Jodi's 10 roles, and then we will talk about those because I do feel like they pertain significantly to what we're going to talk about here today. So Jodi's 10 roles are dad, sister, daughter, friend, part of the earth, small business owner, husband, wife, farmer, and child of creation. And the 3 roles that she's most looking forward to in the second half of life are husband, wife, and dad. So can we talk a little bit about what you're looking forward to the most in terms of being a husband, wife, and dad, and maybe why you choose those labels?
First of all, to look forward is interesting concept for me. I try to be very present based. And so presently the most important roles in my life are being a parent, and the children in my life have just always called me dad, and it's stuck. And so that's just how it is. And we're pretty gender fluid around, in our household. And then just also being a wife and a husband, again, it kind of ebb and flows. I have a female wife. And again, those roles kind of ebb and flow for us. So, but those are the most important roles in my life. And so that's what I look forward to continuing.
How do those experiences then shape the work that you do as a consultant, especially around the urgency of awareness and discussing societal systems?
Yeah. In the book that I wrote, The Urgency of Awareness, the chapter 1, we talked about how you and I, we live in a societal system that has normalized one identity over another. And that a societal system always gears itself to the normalized identity. And what that just means is then that there's benefits you receive from being part of the normalized. And so you are going to have different experiences than someone who's not part of the normalized. And so one of the examples I use is we normalize right-handedness. So those of you listening right now, if you're right-handed, I'm going to say, well, what are the benefits? And a lot of times right-handed people can't think of many. But if you're listening right now and you're left-handed and I say, what are the benefits? Let me guess. You already said it and it came from down under. You're like, scissors, right? It always comes up from left-handed people. Scissors and school desks. And then it just keeps going on and on. Can openers and ladles and power tools and manufacturing equipment. The safety guards are on as if you're going to use it right-handed. So left-handed people put themselves in harm's way. And firearms are geared for right-handed, cars geared for right-handed. And so all of a sudden, right-handed people start realizing, oh my gosh, I didn't know that stuff was geared. Well, of course, when you're part of the normalized dominant, things just work for you. It's the water that you swim in. It's the air you breathe. You don't see it until someone else talks about, hey, I've had a different experience. And so in the book, we talk about 18 different identity sets. So left-handed, right-handed being one of the 18. Obviously, race is one, being white or black, indigenous, person of color. Sexual expression, gender is. And so as I become more aware of identities and how living in a societal system that's normalized one identity over the other has impacted me, I myself have personally kind of started just to loosen up on those identities. They don't mean as much to me. So if somebody calls me a man or a woman, I really don't care. I mean, it just doesn't mean it's fluid for me. It's the same with being a parent. And so, yeah, I lost my train of thought. How was that?
No, that sounded good. So we're just diving right into all of this. Usually we do our 10 roles and then we banter for a little bit. So this is going to be a way more interesting conversation than you not wanting to talk about your 10 roles. So let's back up a little bit here because you jumped into the societal systems, and in the book you identify them as individual, organizational, communities, and policies. So can you elaborate on those four a little bit for us?
So when I say societal system, that's how I define it. There's four major components in our societal system. You and I and everybody listening, we live in our societal system. And then we have institutions, and that could be our synagogue, our church, the police department, schools, Best Buy, Target. And then we have communities. And let's be honest, communities come in different sizes. So some communities are, when you say community to some of us, we think our family. After the holidays, you're probably not thinking that no more. But for some of us, we're thinking our neighborhood. And for some of us, we're thinking the entire county, the entire state. And so let's be honest, communities do come in different sizes. And then there's policies. And policies are gear or affect individuals. A policy telling me how fast I can drive back home. I personally think it's a suggestion, but law enforcement disagrees. And then there's policies that guide our institutions, our communities as well. And those policies come at local levels, they come at state, they come at federal levels. Now let's be honest, there's a lot of other elements in our societal system, but those are the four major components. And in order for something to get normalized, let me be very clear, it does not have to be the majority. It has to have policies once were or currently are, as well as communities, individuals, and institutions. So the societal system once was or currently is geared towards that identity. So if you just look at women didn't have the right to vote. The policies were geared towards men. And even though a lot of policies have changed, we still see how that has impacted us. It's still, men are still normalized. So it doesn't have to do with numbers. So when I work in South Africa, for example, I do work there, and they say anywhere from 5 to 7% of the population is white. Well, white is still what is normalized in South Africa. So even though it's not the majority, it's still normalized. And so here in the United States, people will sometimes look at my as a triangle chart, and they'll say, well, oh, the white, that won't be normalized much longer in the United States. And I'll ask, well, why not? And they're like, well, because we currently do have more people of color born in America. And at some point, we're going to actually just have more of the population in America be people of color than white folks. And I said, yes, but it's not a numbers game. So that number doesn't change 400 years of, policies geared towards white folks, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And so that's something that I want to go back to in just a little bit. But can you talk about, you said you were working in South Africa. What were you doing in South Africa?
This is several years ago now, or with the pandemic, everything seems like it was several years ago, doesn't it? Right? So it probably was yesterday. I don't know. But working in South Africa, a lot we're learning from what they have gone through with apartheid and how they're trying to restructure and rebuild their societal system. And then also sharing some of what we've learned in the United States, being a little bit further ahead in that process.
It's interesting that you bring up South Africa because one of our favorite guests is Dr. Yvette Erasmus,
Yes.
and she grew up in South Africa, and she talked to us about, having a father who upheld apartheid policies and a mother who fought against apartheid policies. And we asked her, are you seeing parallels between South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and the United States today? And she said she sees striking similarities between that. And I'm curious if you're seeing that as well.
Yeah. I think anytime you oppress, whatever word you want to use, you want to oppress one group over another, or you make one group normalized dominant, there's some very similar dynamics start to occur. So you see it in any place that you go where that's happening. You see similarities. Specifically with race, yes, there are some, but both have their unique history, but yet there's always some similarities.
I think in the book, you said that when we start off in societal systems from our lens, it's usually from an individual lens. And then I don't know if all of us get to organizational.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll ask in the book is in our societal system. Remember, that's individuals, institutions, communities, and policies. My question would be to listeners right now is which one is your primary focus? Because we don't tend to immediately think systemically. And so I'm not saying we don't. We all do. We all eventually get to societal system, but we'll think systemically. But most of us will just think we'll have one of those four will be our primary lens. America tends to, my experience, be very individual. So a lot of my audiences will say, well, I look at things very individual. Now, for myself, I grew up out in the rural, and I absolutely looked at the world individual because I didn't travel. I didn't get outside my county. And so then when I came and I moved up to Minneapolis, and when I started doing work, most of my work was individual contact. And so when I worked with folks individually, then again, my primary focus, and I remember I went to a presentation, and I love what this presenter was saying, but within 45 minutes, I'm like, hey, brother, can you tell me great information, thumbs up on you. But how do I take what you're saying and use it when I'm working individually with folks? And because that was my primary focus. As I got promoted, then all of a sudden, and for those of you listening who are in supervising roles, many times when you get promoted, now your employer pays you to do what's best for the institution. All of a sudden, you're supposed to think about what's best for the institution. And so I remember reading data back in the day when I was working for Catholic Charities that said we were seeing at a higher rate in poverty people who had both a mental health issue and a chemical dependency issue. And I remember reading that research article in my office, and I immediately thought, oh my gosh, if this is who's coming through the door, then how does our agency have to look different? How does our program have to change? So my primary focus was institution. Over the years now, I've helped several communities. I work with entire counties. I work with 15 counties in the United States. And through that work, working with entire counties became my primary focus. And then, of course, policies. When I got off the road for a little while, I was an executive director. And as an executive director, I realized how much policies affect what we can and cannot do in our institutions. And so different times of our life will have different primary focuses, but we tend to go to one a little bit more than the other three.
And it's interesting you talk about in the book that oftentimes we bring our individual experiences to the organizational.
Yes.
And then we think that we're being best intentioned with the policies that we're creating, when in turn we're really just creating a utopic vision of what I would like to see, but maybe not necessarily the people that we are aiming to help.
Exactly, because if you have a secondhand experience, that's not like having the real life journey of it. And so I come in and I may want in social services or in education, I want to help a student or someone who has different identities than me, but I'm bringing in my preconceived notion on what that is. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have anything to offer, but it means I also need to be able to sit down and listen to those who do hold that perspective, and more importantly, create a space in our institution for folks to have that voice.
When you talked about that in the book, what really resonated with me was my shifting experience from being a teacher in the classroom to being a dean and taking on some more administrative roles, because then I was more behind the scenes and taking a look at, well, how do we uphold policy? How do we uphold rules? How do we disseminate information to a large body rather than just my classroom?
Right. And that I say with a lot of employers that I work with is, as you promote internally, we often don't do a good job of just really clearly communicating, hey, one of the reasons you were successful as an employee is because you were a great individual and you work very well with other individuals. But now we need you to do what's best for the institution or the program. And that means a lot of times behind the scene work. And it also means sometimes kind of upholding a policy that individually you don't like what it's doing individually, but it has to be upheld for the long-term result.
And another reason why we wanted to have you on, particularly in this season where we're talking about reinventing ourselves, is because in the book you say awareness of how living in a societal system often labels us and can limit our potential. So we wanted you to talk a little bit more about how these societal systems get in the way of reaching our potential.
I think it's not just the societal system, but it's also our lack of awareness. So we grow up and we're not aware that we're in a societal system that's normalized one thing over the other. And so sometimes we then start to believe our experience was quote unquote the right experience or is of more value than someone else's, when really men have experienced the societal system differently than women. It's not bad, it's not worse, but it's different. Same with this, same also then with some of the other identities that I have in the book. And with that different experience comes different perceptions. And so the more I understand how I've been shaped by the societal system, growing up in a societal system that's normalized one thing over the other, the more then I am aware of my perception and I can be open to others. So when I want to reinvent myself, I know this is silly, but go back to right-handed, left-handed. If I never understand that I've grown up in a societal system that's geared to right-handed, and I am right-handed, that's going to limit my ability to reinvent myself because I've only known right-handedness. It limits my understanding. If I start to become aware of what was all geared towards me, and I also become more aware of the left-handed perspective, then I have a bigger holistic understanding. And so when I go to reinvent myself, I can do it from a more holistic place, and I can also do it from a place of better awareness of the different experiences in the societal system.
So what I want to do here is take a quick break, because when we come back, we're going to talk about those 18 pairs of triangles. We're not going to break them all down for you, but I want to talk about those in a little more depth. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis.
Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. If you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. Also, giving our show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words helps us on our quest to reach the top of the podcast charts. Finally, since you can't make a mixtape for your friends and loved ones like you used to do, share this podcast with them instead. We hope our experiences resonate with others and inspire people to live their best lives. Thanks again. And now, let's take a minute to be present with our breath. If you're listening somewhere safe and quiet, close your eyes and slowly inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Slowly exhale for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's do that one more time. Inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Slowly exhale for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and open your eyes. You feel better? We certainly hope so. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Once again, we are here with Jodi Pfarr, and she's talking to us about the urgency of awareness and becoming more aware of the societal systems that are at play when it comes to understanding our own experiences. And in the book, you break down some of these societal systems into 18 pairs of triangles, with one triangle representing what's normalized and the other representing what's not normalized, such as male, female, white, people of color, heterosexual, LGBTQ+, which can be hot button issues for people to discuss around the dinner table during the holidays. But you make it clear that there isn't a right or wrong in any of this. It just comes down to the experiences we've had and are currently living. So what do we do with that awareness then?
Well, first I want to clarify one thing, Billy, is we only have one societal system. So the United States, we have a societal system that has normalized some identities over another. And in the book, I name 18 different identities that it is normalized. And what I have people do is I have a triangle chart. A triangle on its base has the normalized identity, like right-handed. Then a triangle right next to it, pointing down, which my editor says there's no such thing as a pointing down triangle, but there is, okay? And so is left-handed. And so there's a chart with 18 different identities like that. And I have people then circle where they are today. Now, some triangles can change. Some obviously cannot, but some can. I'm first generational formal education. I'm first generation, there's things that I'm first generation, but that's where I am today. So when you circle, it's not to say you didn't ever live in the other identity. It's not to say you don't have any understanding. But it is to say this is where I am today. Once we have that, we want to start to process. And processing means you're going to dive into emotions. I mean, anytime we process, there's going to be emotions. And so just go back to the right-handed, left-handed example again. When I bring that up to audiences, I'll have right-handed people get frustrated. I'll have them get angry. I'll have them deny. I'll have right-handed people go, I worked hard to get where I got. I didn't have no dang benefit. And I'm like, ho, hey, ho. If you worked hard, then you worked hard. Now, if by any chance you worked hard on construction crews, when you got to that construction crew, you picked up any tool and you went to work. I said, but a left-handed person didn't have that benefit. A left-handed person went to the construction crew. Now they have to pick up, what are you going to do? You got a decision to make. Do I pick up the tool and stumble with it, put myself in danger, don't do as great of a job? Do I go over and explain to my boss, no, I can't do that, but that runs the risk of being perceived as not willing to work hard, and so just those little things of adjusting. And then I have to, because I'm from the state of Minnesota, I have to talk about guilt. That, oh my gosh, normalized dominant folks, right-handed people, that happens in Minnesota all the time. When right-handed people find out they got a benefit they didn't work for, they're like, oh my goodness, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I didn't know about the left-handed, I didn't know about the scissors. Oh, we'll get that fixed for you. And it's like, yeah, get over yourself, right? I mean, so it's okay to have the feelings. It's okay to have the feelings. Here's what I tell my audiences all the time. Don't act out of the feeling. Don't act out of the anger. Don't act out of the frustration. Don't act out of the guilt, because it's not going to be effective. And so you want to process those feelings. And so we talk about how to process those feelings so that, and in the book I talk about, so you can move to ownership. Ownership is where I'm aware of where I've been part of the norm and where I haven't. And I've spent time processing that and how that's affected me, because it's affected you. Like if you're left-handed, I've had left-handed people, same thing, get frustrated. Jodi, I'm so sick and tired. I always have to adjust to the system. Nothing's ever set up for me, and no one ever understands how much I'm adjusting. And it's like, yeah, talk to anyone who's not part of the normalized identity, and they'll tell you, yes, I adjust every day. A lot of people here in Minnesota, especially people of color, they can't bring their whole selves to work. They're adjusting all the time, and their coworkers never understand how much they're adjusting. And so that, you dang right, that gets exhausting, it gets frustrating, it gets angry. And then there's denial. It's interesting, it's around the age of 70, but 70-year-old participants in my audience, when I do the left-handed, right-handed thing, the left-handed 70-year-old and above, oh, they hate that activity. They're like, Jodi, knock it off. Jodi, it's not a big deal. Jodi, you just learn to adjust. If you're left-handed, you just learn to adjust. Just stop talking about it. Just knock it off. And it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because if you spent 70 years adjusting to the normalized, the last thing you want is some little punk kid standing up here reminding you that it's different. And so we all have to process those feelings, and we start to move to what I call ownership, because that's where we can listen to each other. Now, I say this, let's say if there's males on this call, let's say Billy asked me to work with all the male listeners, and I work with you guys for like 3 months. And one day you just start telling me what it's like to be a male in America. And I'm going to assume listeners are different ages, different races. So
we actually have mostly female listeners.
Well, there you go, Billy.
Yeah. I think it's because we're so attractive
They are, just for the record, guys. Whatever you're envisioning, it's accurate. It's accurate with these guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. So we're going with males though, because I'm a female. And so one day men just start telling me what it's like to be men in America. If I haven't processed this, then I'm going to operate out of my feelings, and there might be some hurts. And so I'm going to but you. Oh yeah, Billy, brother, that's rough, man. If you're the same skin color as me, you got $1 on my 77 cents. Oh, Brian, that's real rough, man. You know what they say? They say women are almost 51% of the population, and yet we're ecstatic to have like 19% of Congress and Senate. And then you guys, somebody else brings up and like, no, Jodi, from a man's perspective, we're just saying our experience is like this. And I'm like, really, really? Well, God's still a he. Drop the mic on that, right? I invoke God. So if but you guys, what's your response most likely going to be?
We're going to get defensive.
Yeah, get defensive and shut down. And then what happens is we drive away more stuck in our experience as the right experience than ever before. And what you just had is you had folks that didn't have that awareness. And let's apply this to your work. How many times have you gone to a meeting and people are always like, oh, we have to have diverse opinions at the table. Yes, but we have to do our work first. So you all of a sudden, oh, let's just bring diversity together. Let's bring students, parents, and let's bring all these diversity together. But if we haven't done our work first, we're going to react to each other, and we drive away more stuck in our experience as the quote unquote right experience. So when we take time out like this and use the book to become more aware, to start to process, and then move to ownership. And I do, that's a circle. That's a circle. I do that. We have to do that all the time. It's not a one and done. I wish it was, but we continue to do that. Then we can start to listen to folks. And so if I own my experience and I'm talking to male listeners and they start telling me what it's like to be men in America, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to listen. I have absolutely no idea. Now, if I sincerely listen, like, oh man, Billy, I never thought of it that way. Oh, really, Brian? It's like, oh, get out. Okay. If I sincerely listen, then when I talk about what it's like to be a woman, we've just increased chances of you guys doing what?
Being receptive.
Yeah, listening. And then if you listen, now we drive away thinking about what the other person says. We don't have to agree. That's the other misconception, is that in order us to get along, we have to agree. In order us to be, we have to, no, but I'm going to create a space where I listen to you and I'm going to reflect on what you say and I'll incorporate it. Now, I might not agree with everything, Billy, but I'm at least going to incorporate and listen and hear it. And we know if we just came off the holidays, a lot of our families, we don't do that. Once one family member gets, something is said that strikes an emotion with another family member, then everybody starts acting out of emotion. Everybody shuts down and eats too much cake. And then there we go. Cookies. And it's the next thing.
That reminds me a lot of the courageous conversations for agreements, where it's stay engaged, speak your truth, experience discomfort, and expect and accept non-disclosure. It sounds like you work that into your conversations, but it's not just around race. It's around all of these 18 triangles that you're looking at.
Yeah, because we have to be aware to speak our truth. We also, though, equally have to be aware that there's other truths out there and that we live in a societal system that normalizes one thing over the other. And so you have to be aware that if you have the more normalized dominant identities you have, the more things have been geared for you, the less you adjust. So if you go through your day and you're not adjusting, you can bring your whole self to work for the most part. A lot of times people who hold more normalized identities say yes. And people who don't are like, yeah, no, especially with race in America. It's like, no, I can't bring all of who I am and what I'm thinking to work. So yes, this does align with that work, but it also is another layer, I would say, of really honoring that we do have a societal system that has impacted us greatly with normalized and that's not normalized.
I feel like you've kind of answered this already, but on the flip side of guilt and shame, I imagine is you've talked about defensiveness, but then also someone saying, well, this just sounds like political correctness at its worst. So do you come back with them and just say, no, dude, just tell me your experience?
Yeah, I just listen to that. I mean, I listen. I work throughout the world, but a lot in the United States, and I work in the most conservative places and I work in the most progressive or liberal places. And I have to be honest with you, the most progressive and liberal are by far the hardest because we like to think here in Minnesota, we're so progressive that we already know all these things, but yet our stats don't show that we're applying it. Look at our school. We were like, second to Mississippi in disparities of graduating kids of color. And you know what I mean? It's like if you look at all of our stats, we're not yielding it. So it's obviously we intellectually may get it, but we're not incorporating it. And so quite honestly, I find more resistance sometimes in liberal communities because they're like, oh, I get this intellectually. I love it that you get it intellectually. How are you incorporating it into your own personal awareness? And how are you then bringing it into your corporation or your company? Because like you said, Billy, that's what makes our culture. The school culture, the company culture is all of us bringing our awareness or our lack of awareness to it and operating out of that. When I work in conservative areas, I'll get that pushback you just mentioned. Well, this just sounds like a lot of political stuff. But there's also an honesty of, yeah, I do look at things differently. I do look at my experience as better than. So there's much more honesty. I do a lot of work in Memphis, for example. Memphis is we can hit the ground running. You can't live in Memphis and not know racism is alive and well today. And this is where Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, murdered. And so there's just an awareness of, yes, there are different experiences, and no, we do not understand each other yet. Where in more liberal places, we like to think we understand, but we don't apply. The stats just don't show that we apply it as well. That was just hard for everybody is just cringing now, right? The Minnesotans, it was not a feel good moment there. Oh, geez. Oh, I don't agree. I think she doesn't know.
Well, but it does hit home because having worked in education for a long time, we talk a lot about intention versus impact. And someone that I know well that I worked with said the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? But it is necessary for us to take action. It reminds me back to what Erica Jones said when we talked to her, and she challenged us to say, when you have that privilege, it's not I should do something. It's you need to do something with it. And I think that makes us sweat a little bit because, like you said, if we're intellectual enough to think it, that sometimes feels good enough.
Right. And I'm going to go one further. I see a lot of Minnesotans do a lot. Like we volunteer at a very high rate, all of that. But I do not see Minnesotans getting uncomfortable. And if you're going to learn somebody else's experience, if you're really going to move into ownership of your own experience, you got to start getting uncomfortable. And see, that's one of the biggest benefits of being part of the normalized is you get to stay comfortable because you get to bring your whole self places. You're used to your voice being listened and heard. And so when you talk, you're used to action happening. And so you're not used to being uncomfortable. And so when you become more aware and you want to take action that makes you uncomfortable, not everything that just continues to bring comfort.
How much, this is going on a tangent here, but how much of a role do you think suburbs play into that, not just in Minnesota, but across the United States? Because when I'm in Europe, there aren't suburbs. everybody just lives in the city and everything is walkable. And I mean, there are obviously nice areas in the cities that I would go to, but everybody just kind of lives in the city. And I know that there's a history within Minneapolis around the suburbs to the west. And so I'm wondering, how much of a role do suburbs play in narrowing our ability to build that awareness?
I think the societal system, I'll restate it this way maybe, the policies within the societal system and the policies that created suburbs and the school funding the way it is. It's school funding that really drives this now of where people live, the economic, the different, you lose diversity because of how we fund our schools. So, find a school that has a high economic diversity, racial diversity, and high achieving is not easy to do in the state of Minnesota. You're going to drive to try to find it. And so the policies that were used to create the suburbs and create how we fund our schools, absolutely have helped keep some people in the normalized dominant in more prosperity, and those without normalized dominant not having the access. And so that if you don't have the access, you don't have the contact, I don't have to take you into consideration.
When I talked about my trip to Portugal and Spain, I talked about how normalized the English language is and how it almost feels like it's an expectation if you're an English speaker that everybody is going to speak English. And I like the example that you gave in the book about the woman who grew up speaking Hindi but had mastered the English language but still spoke with a slight accent. So she circled all of the normalized English triangle, but then she circled a corner of the other triangle just to represent that she also fits into that group in some way. So what does that say about how we view our experiences and how others may view them?
Well, what I talk about is if you get the benefits, because, thanks, Billy, for bringing up that point. The normalization and all the isms, racism, classism, they don't fit neatly into a triangle chart. And of course, I'm kind of trying to make them too. And so what I say is if you get the benefit of the normalized dominant, you have to circle all or some of it. And so this young woman said, well, listen to me speak. I was raised in private British schools. I have high formal, but I don't always get the benefit because I have an accent. And so I asked, well, how do you want to circle? And she's like, well, I'm going to circle all of the normalized dominant because if you email me, you'll never know. And she said, but I'm going to circle about a fourth, because about a fourth of the time, I don't get the benefit. And I said, absolutely. In research, research proves you correct. Americans, we're not real fond of accents. Well, if we consider it, and I'm doing air quotes, everybody, a foreign accent, we get shorter with that person first. We don't trust them as quick. All that research is there. So I said, that's absolutely. But she was honoring that she does get that. Now, I had a man, I was presenting up in Duluth, and I had a man, and when I say a man, he was about 6 feet 3 inches tall. He had a beard. He had male clothing on. When he went to circle triangles, he raised his hand and he said, Jodi, I can't circle male. And I said, okay. I said, excuse me. I said, I apologize. I said, because when I saw you walk in the door and I perceived male. And I said, so I just assumed male. So can you help me understand why you can't circle male? And he goes, because I'm a feminist. Well, I didn't even have to follow up. All the women at his table took care of that for me. They're like, thank you. You get the benefits of being a male, so circle male. And they just broke it down. Like they just rattled off all the benefits he's getting. Did you worry about where you parked today? Well, we did, because when we get done, it's going to be dark out. Did you, they just rattled it off. And so when you circle, it's not saying that you don't have any understanding. It's not saying that you're not an ally, but this is what you're living out of, and you will get those benefits. And so to be honoring that you get them. And so I grew up with casual register English, but I have formal, not a high formal, but I have formal. I still speak casual in most of my interactions, but I have to circle formal because I have that benefit. So when I see people are starting to judge me because I curse too much or I use too much slang, I can kick it up a notch. AKA, I can start to use my formal register. And when I utilize my formal register, then all of a sudden you can see they start to give me more benefit. And so even though I am fluid and casual and I will speak it in my personal life, I would circle formal English because I have access to it and I can get those benefits when I need it.
This is such a fascinating conversation. So we're going to take a quick break and let everybody digest what we just talked about in that segment. And then when we come back, we're going to hear more from Jodi Pfarr. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis.
Thanks for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. We will do our best to put out new content every Wednesday to help get you over the midweek hump. If you'd like to contact us, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like us to discuss, feel free to email us at mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. Check out the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. Oh, and don't forget to show yourself some love every now and then, too. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. We are sitting here having a fascinating conversation with consultant Jodi Pfarr. She is the author of the book, Urgency of Awareness. You can get it at her website, which is www.jodipfarr.com. We will link it in our show notes. You can also hire her to come and speak at your organization. Get more information once again at her website. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, Billy, and I'm going to tell the listeners it's PFARR.
And they'll see that if they actually look at the show notes.
Anybody looking, they're daydreaming about what you two guys look like now. They're not looking at the phone no more.
Oh, we can only hope. And again, flattery will get you everywhere with me, so I greatly appreciate that.
I'm aware.
So you co-authored this book with Alison Bovair, who passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2015.
Yes.
And in the book, you used the information from your presentations in conjunction with Alison's experiences. So how does sharing Alison's experiences enhance one's understanding of what's being shared in this book or what's being presented in this book by you?
Well, two things. Alison grew up with a lot of triangles not normalized dominant. And throughout her life, then she gained normalized dominant. And some things you can't. If you're Native American, you're Native American. You're not going to suddenly become white. So she has an amazing stories that were able to really make my concepts come to life because of her lived experience. And then she also was on her crossing over journey. She lived with pancreatic cancer longer than most get to. So I think there's a perspective that honestly only one can gain when you know that you're crossing over. And so for her, in the front of the book, it talks about her mantra was to have benevolent detachment and to be present and to practice that, because you constantly have to practice that benevolent detachment. And that just aligns with the work, is you can't have that benevolent detachment so that you can be present unless you have awareness. And you and I, no matter where we live, we grew up in this societal system that's normalized one thing over the other. And as much as we want to say we weren't affected, we're affected by it. And so how were we affected by it? The more we're aware, then the more we can start to let go and be present. But that has to be, like you said, intentionally practiced. And so there has to be action.
I'm glad that you brought up benevolent detachment and you kind of talked about it there, but I'm still having a hard time understanding that concept even after reading through the book and just that little explanation. So what do you mean by benevolent detachment?
One of the examples that Alison uses is having people in her own life who chose to continue to drink, chronic inebriates, and family members. And she's like, I love them. I'm not going to live out of the guilt I have for them or the anger I have for them. I love them, but I'm also going to detach from that behavior or from them. So those of us who still, when our family members, we got together over the holidays, our family members said something politically that just make us want to hate that person, that's not benevolent detachment. Benevolent detachment is you process your feelings, you tap into why that agitates you so much, because it is about us and our hurts most of the time. And then once we get that, I can still love you, I can still be attached, but I'm detached from that piece. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it actually it hits a little hard for me because I think about some of my family members who I have detached from, but not benevolently.
Right. Right. Exactly.
That I'm estranged from.
Right. And then my question is how is that any different? Like even in the political spectrum, we're operating out of the same same side of the spectrum when we're like, well, if you don't believe my way, then I have to detach from you. And I don't care if it's because you liked Trump, didn't like Trump, if you know what I mean? But if you're saying things like that, you're coming at it from the same lens because you're both detaching, but you're not benevolently detaching, and you don't have awareness. With awareness, you understand why you think that way. You're open to hearing how the other person thinks that way. And again, you don't have to agree. I drive away from a lot of people not agreeing with them, but I really take what they said and let it touch my heart and my spirit. And I might not agree in one area, but I'm still going to love them. And so for me, that's the ultimate. That's what, because Miss Bell Hooks, and she wouldn't want me calling her Miss, but, respectfully, Miss Bell Hooks just passing away. That was what she talked about. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about this, is if I operate out of my hurts and my anger, and I get that. Ooh, I did it for years. So there's no judgment when people do have to do that. I mean, if you're getting oppressed every day and you can't show up and be yourself every day, oh man, you get angry sometimes. You get frustrated or you shut down. Those are all legit, and they're real and they're fine. And then if we want to eventually come together to take action, how do we start to become more aware ourselves and let go of our hurts so that we can sit across the table from someone who experiences it very differently? Because ultimately it is going to take all of these experiences to start to move our societal system to operate differently.
You know what's interesting is I just had an awareness right here that when we talked about the guilt and the shame and the people who are on the other side and talk about political correctness, that's how the normalized respond when you do these presentations. But I don't know that we've really talked about the emotions that bubble up for the not normalized groups. And you kind of touched on it there, that anger can bubble up because they've been dealing with the burdens or the inconveniences of being in the not normalized group. Yeah.
And unfortunately in America, like with left-handed, right-handed, it's an inconvenience. With race, it's life and death. And so you've been dealing with life and death matters that other people don't even have to be aware of. So I used to talk about, for example, some examples I use in race that 10 years ago, even 7 years ago, most of my white audience did not understand or get. And one of them was, when police pull you over, do you think at the end of it you're going to be heard? And if you're not heard, do you think you can go and dispute the ticket or, and it was my white audiences who were, yes, of course, Well, there is a different experience. And so then I'm like, and then I'd ask people of color, is there a different experience? And if they're comfortable sharing it. And it's like, and now after George Floyd, people are starting to get that. They're starting to, like, yes. Well, another one that I use is returns. Do you go ahead and return if we had the holidays, do you go return your gift and think nothing of it? And again, there's a lot of white privilege in that. And so there's a lot of different colors in my family, and it goes from darker brown and then brown. And it goes like this. The people who are the darkest in my family, they give their returns to me because they're like, I'm not dealing with it. I'm not dealing with not being listened to. I'm not dealing with being questioned. I'm not dealing with, and I've showed up, I don't know about you, but I know I've showed up without a receipt, I just showed up with a product and I've been like, hey, I shop here all the time. I swear to you, And they're like, whatever. And they don't question it. I've had my family members who are black and brown show up and they have the receipt, they have their driver's license, and they're still questioned. And it's like, that gets beyond exhausting. And so it's those different experiences that oftentimes that we have to become more aware of. And now if I want to listen to and understand people's experience that are black and brown, then I dang well also have to try to listen to people who have different viewpoints than mine. And so that means I have to process any emotions that come up.
So it sounds like benevolent detachment is coming out of love. It's a detachment out of love.
Absolutely. So
just to kind of challenge that a little bit, we talk a lot to self-help people and where they talk about energy and that sort of thing. So what's the difference between benevolent detachment and ridding yourself from toxic people in your life?
I'm going to be real honest, which is not popular right now. I don't think there's that many people that are toxic that you have to remove them from your life. Now, if someone has harmed you physically, mentally, sexually, remove. There's a hard line there, obviously. But other than that, it says more about us and less about that other person. is I've had people in my life who've harmed me very much. And that was Allison's point too, is she's had people in her life who've harmed her, but through understanding, like, okay, well, what in the societal system, what identities are they living out of? How were they affected? Where were they coming from? And then how am I affected? And once you start to get that understanding, it's not saying the behavior was okay. It's not saying I will tolerate that. No, Billy, I'm not going to tolerate you cursing me out. But if I have that understanding of you and I have some ultimate love, that's that piece, then I can have benevolent detachment. This whole people are toxic thing, I think that says more about our limited ability to process our own emotions and move to ownership than it does to the other person. Now, again, I say that knowing there are some people that do serious harm, and yeah, you have to rid them. And I'm not saying you don't have to rid people for a while too, because if Billy, you and I get into it, I might have to take a 3-month break from you so I can process, but then I re-engage, and I might re-engage from this benevolent detachment, but I'm not going to sit in the place of, of judgment of they're toxic, so I remove them, because most likely I haven't dealt with all my emotions then yet. And I know now we need cigarettes and whiskey, right? If you're not, or whatever your vice is, chocolate, whatever, a Coke,
Wow. That's
and it's not a popular thing to say, but that's, I mean, if you look at any of the leaders that we tend to hold up, you look at Nelson Mandela, you look at Martin Luther King Jr., you look at the bell hooks. I mean, these are people, man, wrong's been done to them more than wrongs have been done in my life. And they were done to them over and over and over. And yet what'd they come back with? Love, 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 and benevolent detachment. They didn't come back with, oh, they're toxic and now I got to write them out. I mean, how would Nelson Mandela have ever led then? He wouldn't have been able to. So, you know what? If he can do it, then I think I can deal with my uncle.
Is that?
I'm not going to be asked back again, but it's okay.
No, you might be asked back every week. Just that one cut deep for me.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Like that one really cut deep for me, and like I'm gonna have to go and just reflect on everything you just said there in terms of how am I internalizing this perceived slight that I feel has been done unto me by a family member. Oh. You asshole, Jodi.
Right,
I didn't want to think like this today. This is not how I don't want you to I don't want to be, part of this. I just wanted to have a cool conversation and let everybody else figure it out for themselves, and I just continue living my life, subconsciously.
I know, without awareness, but saying we have awareness. Yes. But so this is what when we get deep into the material, I'll give you and your audience members this tool. Is when we process emotions, because that's when you said somebody slighted you. Well, there's emotions there. And so this is the 4-step process. Number 1, name that emotion. And then number 2, give yourself permission to have that emotion. So, well, I felt slighted. Well, okay, I felt hurt. And then say it's okay to feel hurt. Now, if you're like me, I have to do that at least 5 times. And I always tell people exhale, do it on an exhale, like, it's really okay to feel hurt, because a lot of times we release a lot of stuff right there. And so number 1, name the feeling, because we are not good at naming feelings. Number 2, say it's okay to have that feeling. And then number 3, ask yourself why you have that feeling. And this is where you ask yourself 100 times and you peel back the layers of the onion. Why am I hurt? Well, because they didn't listen to me. Well, why does it matter if somebody listens to you? Well, because growing up I didn't get listened to, or because this person always got listened to and I never did. Or, you know what I mean? And you can start to pull that, because what you're doing then is getting down to your core hurt. Because many times when we have an emotion, it is just what it did is it just resonated on one of our core hurts. And so that's where you get down as deep as you can. And then number 4 is that's where you take action. Is step 4 is you put it all together. I feel hurt. I feel hurt because that person didn't listen to me, and that triggers some of my experience and my hurts of growing up and not being listened to. And now I'm going to choose to do. And so number 4 is I feel this way and I'm going to choose to do this. And sometimes it's a bad thing, like a bad behavior. Like, trust me, I've done this. Like, I feel hurt and I'm going to choose to go to the bar. Hell yeah. You know what I mean? And that's fine, but at least I'm conscious and I'm choosing it. And when you're conscious and you're choosing it, there's only so many times you're going to choose more negative behaviors to escape before finally you're like, look, okay, I did the bar for 6 months. That's only got me so far. How about I choose to go for a walk? How about I choose to, write this person a letter or whatever so that I can start to have benevolent detachment. I can start to move on. Because what I would tell people is when people live out. So when I talk to people and they're like, oh, that person's toxic for me and I've cut them off, or they live that out, you are very much engaged with that person. You are very much letting that person be in control of you yet. If you're living that out, if it's not something that you don't even think about, you just cut someone off and you never think about it, you don't talk about it, you don't nothing, that might be different. but that's the ultimate. And Allison talks about that, again, she had many things happen to her, and to be able to process them and just be like, living out of that benevolent detachment. Like, you're still a human, you're still a creation, and for her, you're still part of the creator. So I'm going to love you like that, but I've dealt with my hurts, I've dealt with this. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
No, it does. And I actually just finished up an interview that we did with Joy Huber, and that episode is following this one somewhere down the line. And Joy is a stage 4 cancer survivor. And,
awesome.
And one thing that Allison talked about in her experience was that transition from being a person who is able-bodied to a person with a disability, and there was like denial involved in that. And I talked to Joy about that, and I said, did you have this? And she didn't have the same debilitating physical symptoms that I'm guessing Allison had, but she does talk about like losing her hair and not being able to go out and do the same things that she used to do when she was 25, 26, 27, that sort of thing. And I even think even as we age,
absolutely,
we start to move into different triangles. So how do people navigate that? Because this podcast is about the beauty of getting older, but the complexities of getting older as well.
Right. So this is beautiful. This happens a lot with audience members. I'd say again, around that 65 and above, they're changing triangles from able-bodied to a person with a disability. From age is one of the triangles too. And it's because at some point in America, you become invisible. And so people will tell me in their 70s, like, people, when we go to a restaurant, they always look at my daughter now. People address her. We go up, any counter we go to, they look right past me and look at the younger person for an answer. And it's like, so you start to become invisible. In Ohio, I was presenting, and a man in his 70s said, Jodi, I had all 18 triangles pointing up my entire life. I am normalized dominant, every single one. I am 70 now, and 2 of them are turning down. The age is turning down, and he was losing his ability. He has a hearing aid, and he also had a cane. And he said, this is messing with me so much. And I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more. Tell me your experience. And he said, I have never had to be aware, and I've never been fearful in my life. He said, I live in a neighborhood that's working class at best. And if there's ever a group of young kids hanging out on the corner, I'd puff up my chest and I'd walk right through them because I knew I could physically handle myself if an altercation happened. And even if I couldn't, by the time the police got there, I knew the police would listen to me. I knew they would take my side. He goes, that's just what I've always experienced. He says, for the first time in my life, he goes, I am so aware of everything. And now when I see those young men, and he goes, and I did just the other day at the end of the corner, he goes, I went full around them. I went across the street, the opposite direction. I went all 3 other streets because I knew that I couldn't take them, and I don't know if I could survive long enough for the police to get there. And if the police got there, I no longer know if the police will believe me because I'm the old guy. And so he's like, for the first time in my life, he goes, I'm fearful. And he goes, Jodi, I've never carried a gun in my life. I did not grow up with guns. And he goes, I'm currently going through conceal and carry lessons right now. And he goes, as you're presenting this is why, because my 2 triangles are changing. I am more aware and I'm not getting listened to, and I am fearful. That taps a fear in with me that I've never known before. And so I'm getting that. Now, as he's speaking, at his table is a young woman, and she is African American. And she was snickering, but not in a bad way. Like she was smiling in a, oh my gosh. And she's like, sir, thank you so much for sharing this story. But I've been aware of those boys since I was 11. And he stopped and dropped. And he goes, what? And he goes, once I started developing as a woman, I've been aware of those men at the end of the corner. She goes, I've always been aware, and I've never thought the police would believe me. And she's like, and now all of a sudden, these two have this huge commonality. Their experiences could not be more different, but now they understand because she's been vulnerable since the day she was born Black in America, and then at 11 or 12 when she started developing as a female. And now he's understanding vulnerability for the first time. And so they had an amazing day together. But it took each of them becoming aware and doing what? Listening to the other person.
I think that's the power of your presentation, because as you were telling that story, I thought he was going to get defensive when she said that.
Oh, no. He was like, it hit him. It hit him like a ton of rocks when she said, I've been aware of those boys since I was 11 or 12. And he looked at her and he didn't get it at first. And she goes, because the minute I developed, I was no longer safe. And I never once thought the police were going to take my side. And he was like, oh, and this was pre-George Floyd and everything. And he was like, oh, he's like, so you live out of this fear every day. She goes, I try not to live out of it, but it's there. And that was a whole new understanding for him. And then he was a whole new awareness for him that he's like, I was wondering, he goes, I knew that I was fearful. I knew that's part of what motivated me to go get a gun. But now he goes, I can really articulate what's going on. He goes, I'm losing these two triangles. I'm losing the benefits, and I've never lost a benefit before. Now, think about it. Right-handed folks, if you're right-handed and then all of a sudden you start turning left-handed, which, again, silly example, but it gives you some insight. And all of a sudden you go to work and things don't work. And all of a sudden the tool doesn't work and the toilet paper isn't on the right side. And you're going through your day and you have to be more aware, adjust more. How is that going to mentally and emotionally affect you? It does. So as you lose triangle identities going down, it absolutely impacts you.
It's so funny whenever you bring up right-handed, left-handed. Brian, how many left-handed bass players do you know? Like, you've heard, we know Jimi Hendrix and we know Kurt Cobain, but when it comes to left-handed bass players, especially...
I know a lot of them.
You know a lot?
Sonny T. Yeah, Sonny T's a lefty. I know a lot of left-handed bass players.
Maybe that comes from your experiences just being in...
I have a bigger network.
Right. But that is so foreign to me to think, and this is just a nerdy music sidetrack right here, but relates just in the sense that I so rarely see left-handed bass players, or there aren't that many left-handed guitar players out there.
Well, and tailing off with the conversation, Sonny T, I think, couldn't find a left-handed bass when I'm guessing this because Sonny plays a right-handed bass, but upside down and left-handed.
So yep. Is the E string on the bottom?
So he's had to adapt into the conversation. Yeah, normal bass players that are normalized.
They're just, and look at our verbiage, normal, which, Billy, that's one of the things I did want to bring up in the book is how we gear our language to the normalized dominant. So we give more asset-based and more value to the normalized dominant. So just think about it. If I have someone who works well for me, they're my right-hand man. If I'm clumsy on the dance floor, I have two left feet. One kid is getting gas, and one kid said to the other kid out by the gas station, they're bantering, and he goes, dude, you're so gay. You're so gay is never a compliment. And even if we hold that identity, even if we are a person of color, we are a female, people are like, oh, well, that's my identity. I'd never use deficit. Oh my gosh, we're the worst offenders sometimes. And so I know I am as a female. My goddaughter went to throw the ball. In my defense, I spent 20 minutes with her, trying to get her to teach her how to throw a ball. And when she went for it on her own, it landed behind her. And I was like, child, you throw like a, and what did I say? I said, you throw like a girl. And I caught myself halfway through. I'm like, child, you throw like a girl, 'cause girls throw great. It was the worst recovery in the world. Even the 3-year-old was like, I don't think so. Right. So sometimes we're the worst offenders, but now, if our language changes, and it does, we put more asset based on the normalized, then the value changes as well. And so you guys, I know that's been out there a lot. Boston Symphony wanted to hire more women musicians, so they had blind auditions. So they had them perform behind the curtain. Well, it changed nothing. They still hired in the high 80, 90 percentile male musicians. And of course, it's a female who had to point it out. And it says, your audition isn't blind. And they're like, well, yeah, it is. We have people arrive before, they leave, we don't let our people move. No, because female musicians, for the most part, are taught to wear what? High heels. And that makes a very distinct sound on the
stage.
Of
course.
And so when they changed that, they made people remove their shoes and do a blind audition. It was almost 41% was offered to females. So that's what implicit bias is all about.
Wow.
So if you ask anyone that was listening to any of those interviews, they're going to say, no, I don't hear male music better or worse than female music, or performers, female or male. Everybody's going to say that, but the bias is there. And of course it is, because however old those interviewers are, if they're in their 30s or 40s, for 30 or 40 years, they've been surrounded by a societal system that's normalized male, a societal system that's had language have more value on male, a societal system that has consciously and unconsciously told them that males are better. And so therefore they hear it better. And that's the kind of stuff we have to become aware of. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so we have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
So then you've talked about this here, and so just kind of wrap this up. How do we put this into practice, and what are some of the tools that can improve our interactions and lead to more awareness of what's a normalized experience for some, but not normalized for others?
Billy, funny you should ask that, because in chapter 4, I have several tools. One of the tools is and all the tools I have in chapter 4, you can use individually when you're talking to somebody, or you can use them with your institution. And so I work with large companies, and they use it with their entire department or school system. And so individually, one of the questions these 4 questions, you can say, okay, how did that individual action, how is it geared towards the normalized? And then how did it create barriers for those who might not be part of the normalized? And then what changes do we want to make? And we can do that same 4 questions. We can do those questions as departments or as businesses. And so I think in the book we talked about, I was working with an organization, and they were looking at their hiring process. And so they just went and took out their hiring policies. And that same question, how their first policy was all applications will be online. Okay, well, how does that benefit the normalized? Well, they went back to page 34, 35 in the book. They looked at the triangle chart, and I don't know about you, but in my life, I'm middle class. I have a computer. I'm able-bodied. I mean, I'm going to fill out the application at home in my jammies, and it'll be great. But then the second question, how does it create barriers? And the barriers aren't intentional, or most of the time they're unintentional. But as they looked at it, they're like, well, statistically speaking, people in poverty in America do not have access to Wi-Fi, do not have a working computer. That means I have to go outside my house. Well, now let's just look at the stats. Statistically speaking, I don't have reliable transportation. I don't have reliable daycare. This becomes a whole day event. I got to find my neighbor to watch my kids. I got to find another person to give me a ride. Then I got to find free access. And so it becomes a whole day event. And so they literally had 4 charts of barriers. And so they got this. So they're sitting in the room, and on the left side of the wall, they see all the benefits, and on the right side they see the barriers. Now and that's awareness and consciousness, because none of them ever thought that. So the next question is, how do we want to change it so everybody can have access? And of course people said, let's just go back to paper. Well, you have to have this discussion, and some people say, well, if we go back to paper, are we going to value a paper application as well as we value an online one? Because some of the staff said, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to value the online one better. And then somebody else said, well, doesn't everybody here touch a computer? So why shouldn't we be justified in having it online? And so long story short, they processed for hours, and they decided, hey, we're going to keep the policy, but as an organization, we're going to address those barriers. And they created a place on their site, because they're open 24/7. So they created a place there that had access to computers, and they just went through their barrier list. They made the door wider so that if you had a wheelchair or walker, you could get in. They even had where when you do your application, you could talk into the computer. They had a headset. They had, oh, wait a second. If you're coming from a single parent or you're coming from poverty, you may bring children with you. So 1/4 of that room, computer room, was set up for kids with intentional toys 0 to 18. And so then when you come in, then they train their staff to say, hey, all of our job applications are online, and here's why. However, you can go home and do it, or you have access here. You can take as much time as you want, and you can do it. And so people go in and so they just kept going down their policies, and they realized, well, wait a second, most of our applications are in English. And there were some positions there where like, we don't care what you speak. You can do this job. We don't care. So they researched in their county what the 5 most popular languages were. And for some jobs, they put it into 5 different languages. So when you clicked on it, you could choose the language of your choice. So just becoming conscious, sitting down and re-looking at how we sometimes unintentionally create those barriers, and then really processing how can we make access for all.
Of course, the thing that I like about the plan in the book is that you have a 90-day map out, like, hey, these are things that you're going to address. So,
such a normalized dominant. Such a normalized. Remember the triangle that says European heritage? That's the European. That's a German there. Yeah,
extremely German. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I like order and systems. So.
I see, and I'm part German, so I had to have chapter 4 be action steps, because it's like there has to. I love process, but there's got to be So the 90-day plans, what that does is it takes all this abstract talk and says, okay, what are we concretely going to do in the next 90 days? And then you come back every 90 days and talk about what has happened, what hasn't. And so that's what I do with entire counties. They have counties that come together with and say, the hospital's there, the school system is there. They're all talking about, this is what we did the last 90 days. This is where we want to go. And this is what didn't get done on our 90-day plan. And this is where we need help. And then that starts to allow us to collaborate as communities. It starts to keep transparency so that we can all know what's going on. And it also keeps us on task because we're German.
Well, Jodi, I can't thank you enough for coming in here today, and I can't recommend this book enough. For those of you out there who do work in organizations, there are activities in this book. There are discussion questions that you and your team can sit down with. If you're an individual, you can sit down and reflect on these almost like they're journal entries. They really just get you to think deeper and deeper about your own relationship with awareness and how you can deepen that awareness for others. So, Jodi, once again, thank you so much for coming in. We absolutely loved having you here.
Thank you for having me. I sure appreciate it.
So, for Jodi, for Brian, this is Billy. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved. Take care, friends. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If this episode resonates with you, please share it with your family and friends. We will do our best to put out new content every Wednesday to get you over the midweek hump. If you want episodes to be downloaded automatically to your phone each week, all you need to do is hit the checkmark, subscribe, like, or follow button, depending on what podcast format you're using. While you're at it, feel free to leave our show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words so more people like you can easily find our show. If you're really enjoying the show and you want to help us out, feel free to make a donation to www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. That's www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. You can also access the link in our show notes. We use the money from these donations to pay whatever expenses we incur from producing the show, but ultimately, we record this show for you. So if you keep listening, we'll keep recording and releasing new episodes each week regardless. If you'd like to contact us, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like us to discuss on future episodes, feel free to email us at mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. Thanks again for listening. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved.